I think it's the right moment to introduce Robert Hernandez, who is an associate professor at USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. And he considers himself, I would say, to be a mad scientist. On the other side, a journalistic scientist. On the other side, he says this is serious business. Why this is serious business, and what this has to do with your future. He will be going to spread out now. Be sure that every single gadget that is out there or is coming to be out there, you will watch it properly and tell us what's in it for journalism. So enjoy, Robert Hernandez. Next, how much minutes do you take for your speech, probably?
I'm going to go as fast as possible so we can get to questions.
Lovely.
I want questions.
Okay.
I want you to interrupt. If you feel like you want to interrupt, feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you very much.
Especially because we all just had lunch, and I want to go to sleep, and you want to go to sleep. So let's try to avoid that as much as possible. My name is Robert Hernandez. I'm a digital journalism professor at USC Annenberg, and what that means is I get to nerd out in my class. And in this slide here, you see a bunch of different technologies that I've played with, from VR to drones and wearables and nerdy stuff that I put on my face. And we'll talk about that stuff. My background before becoming a professor, and I put professor in quotes, is that I was a product of the newsroom. I was director of development for SeattleTimes.com, where I ran a team of engineers and designers, and USC made me an offer I couldn't refuse to essentially do R&D for the industry. I don't have to worry about the ROIs of anything. I get to just experiment, hijack new technology, and view it through the prism of journalism. So we're at a digital innovator conference. We know this stuff, but I like to set the table for one quick moment. The adoption rate to all these platforms skyrocket, right? If something new comes out, you download it. Did Yo make it out here? Anyone heard of the app Yo? Yo. All it does was say Yo. Almost like a million users signed up for it in one day. They were all gone the next, right? Peach, anyone download the Peach.cool app, right? These are things that someone put something out, we go try it out. Sometimes we don't even ask questions. If our Lord and Savior Steve Jobs, through Tim Cook, says this is a new watch you must buy, people go buy it, right? So the adoption rate for technology is moving fast, right? We know this. It's hard to believe that Twitter just celebrated their 10-year anniversary. Let's hope they don't screw up the product. And we know that mobile just outperforms broadband desktop stuff. We see the influence of mobile in our content, in our journalism. This was taken today from Brussels, the attack, right? Not only photos, but videos as well. This is a video from what someone took from the evacuation this morning, right? This is happening in real time. All this stuff is happening in real time. This is an example I always give from the Boston bombing. It's a couple years old. This is the Boston Marathon bombing, a photo taken by David Green. And think about it for one moment. David just experienced a terrorist attack. And he's running away from everything, and it says, I got to put that on Facebook. Right? He took a picture and put it on Facebook. For better or for worse, this is our reality, right? And we all know this, right? The authorities knew that. So the FBI and authorities asked everyone at the event, hey, we know you took photos. We're looking for suspects. Can you take a look at those photos and see if you find any of the suspects? David looked at his photo, and lo and behold, he found the younger brother who was involved with the bombing. I show this photo not only for that, but also for the fact that this young lady is not holding a newspaper. She's not holding a television set. She's not holding a radio. She's not holding a laptop. In fact, she's holding all those things in one, clutched to her chest, right? That's a mobile device, right? That helps kind of set the table. I also like to set the table with this stat, which is actually kind of old now. It says 91% of Americans, but I would argue this is global, have their mobile devices within arm's reach 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's the first thing you look at when you wake up. It's the last thing you look at when you go to sleep. And somehow, if you're married, your spouse is okay with that, right? It just is the way of life. You leave the house without your phone, you panic. You leave your house without your purse or wallet, you'll survive. Laptop, hey, it's a light work day, right? I was talking to someone last night about their smartwatch. They'll live without a smartwatch, but their phone is with them at all times. If it's not in your hands, it's in your purse, it's in your back pocket. If you think about it, this essentially is a wearable. This is an inefficiently designed wearable. It's in my hand at all times. It's inefficient because I get out of the reality and just lock into the screen. If I'm nimble, it's one-handed. If I'm not as nimble, it's two-handed, or you got a phablet phone, two-handed, right? It's with you all the time. So let's just make that leap into the concept of wearables. This is a slide from a colleague from New Zealand who said, well, if we look at evolution of technology, if you start with the concept of computers, mainframes filled up a room, and they got smaller and smaller and more powerful over time, well, we see the evolution to desktop, to laptop, to smartphone, a little bit of a tablet, to Google Glass. Well, probably not Google Glass. That said, 2 years ago, I asked myself a question of, well, okay, what if wearables were a thing and Google Glass became a thing? What would our content and our stories be there, right? So I created a class called Glass Journalism. I brought students together. A third of them were developers, a third of them were journalists, and a third of them are what I call misfits. PR folks, marketing folks, UX, UI designers, and we came together to try to figure out what the heck would a story be on this device. We got written up about, which is great, yay. Mashable wrote about us, Coca-Cola wrote about us, but they were focusing on the technology. I'm more interested in how do you tell a story that fits in there. So we did some cool stuff. We created some apps. But one thing we tested out was this little, this is the screen. It's smaller than the traditional first monitor that came out, 640 by 360. How do you fit that, right? Google Glass, if you hold your phone out, that screen is how much real estate it takes in your field of vision. So what kind of stories can you tell there? We did a test with this thing called Spritz. If you can read English, you know more languages than I do, I know two. I want you to take a look at that line right there. Focus on that line. You're about to read real damn fast. Raise your hand if you read that. I don't know if you call it reading, downloading, but one word at a time in a small screen, information was given to you. We did some tests on that. I did a story. There's a very famous essay called The Machine Stops, which is over 2,000 words, or 200,000 words. I don't remember the length. We put it on there just for shits and giggles to see if we can make someone's eye bleed. They never blinked for a while. We tried different lengths. We did a bunch of different user tests and moved on. The semester was over. Right now, the hotness is virtual reality. We've had a couple people yesterday talk about VR. And, you know, for those, just to kind of define it, virtual reality is when you enter another world, a virtual world, through a head-mounted display. I shut off this reality and I go into another reality. That reality could be completely made up and fictionalized, or it could be recreated, or it could be, you know, video made from something real, right? So that's virtual reality. For nerds, we think of the holodeck from Star Trek, but going to another world, essentially. And what's interesting that a lot of people often forget is virtual reality has been promised for decades, overly hyped, constantly under-delivering. Yet this kid, a former journalism student who dropped out of college in one university and came to my university, developed the Oculus Rift. Working with Nonita La Peña, who's been dubbed the godmother of VR. She's a journalist. She had an active hand in creating this billion-dollar company that starts from content and technology, right? So this young man made virtual reality not a joke. And the difference between, right off the bat, between Google Glass and virtual reality is Google Glass was just one device. There were a couple people talking about other smart glasses. But here we see the variety of different headsets. Every time I give this talk, I add a new logo, a new icon, a new device. And it's not just head-mounted displays from like HTC Vive or the Microsoft HoloLens. It's not only just how you consume the device, which also ranges from Google Cardboard, or this is my favorite one right now for $35. Google and Mattel partnered up. Do you guys remember the ViewMaster with the little disc and you click through? This is the modern version of the ViewMaster. You pop your phone in there, you look at a disc that is augmented reality, which is shit interface. But once you launch it, it's really interesting. They've got some diverse experiences that you can check out. So those are the different levels of head-mounted display. There's also different levels of content creation. And I break them up into two buckets. One bucket is CG, 3D modeling, using Maya or Cinema 4D, and you import those elements into a gaming engine like Unreal or Unity. These are things that are not in our wheelhouse in a typical newsroom. Some newsrooms, some graphics departments have started to use Cinema 4D. But what it is closer to our wheelhouse is video production. And we see, John spoke yesterday with their camera that no newsroom's ever going to afford. There's also the Nokia Ozo, no newsroom's ever going to afford. It goes for $60,000. And then it goes to the low end, like the Theta, which is about $300. The new one, Theta S, goes around for $500, and it is not very good. It's getting better, and there's some cool stuff that you can do with it, but this is a really great way for someone to test out and find the best practices of what is VR and immersive storytelling. The standard kind of setup that a lot of people are using is the thing on top there. That's a Heroes 360. I prefer the Freedom 360 mount. It's a $500 mount, although you can 3D print it. And you put GoPros in there, from 6 GoPros to 14 GoPros, and you stitch it together through software. The one I use is made from Color. It's called Autopano. Color a few months ago, got bought by GoPro. GoPro bought that company. GoPro is getting into the game. GoPro announced that they're working on a camera device that's going to be really, I hope, solves a lot of problems. But even with those technical problems, which will disappear this year, you can make really compelling content. There is other things up there, like the Bubble Cam, and Samsung announced a way better version than this, a little eyeball called the Samsung 360. They haven't said the price point yet, I don't think. So to create content, compelling content, is possible. To consume it, you don't necessarily have to do it through a VR headset. You can publish it through YouTube 360. Facebook now does 360 videos. There are startups like Little Star and Viridio that want to be the YouTube of 360, but YouTube is going to be the YouTube of 360. So there are more players on every type of the production process to make this content. And the content varies, right? VR content has been very gimmicky over time. That is Game of Thrones from South by Southwest. You can step inside a Van Gogh painting, which is really beautiful. This piece here called The Party is haunting. It's about date rape in a college party. You see two perspectives, the victim and the person who committed it. Really powerful. Or to something where you flap your wings and you have a bird's point of view. As you flap, the fan gets stronger. Right? That's really cool. None of it is really journalism, per se. So that's the question I like to wrestle with. Well, what is VR journalism? And what are the stories that we can tell about that? Well, I'm not the first one on there, although I've been experimenting with VR for some time. The first, I will credit Noni de la Peña, who did Hunger in the Golden State, an incredible experience, but hard for it to scale at the time. The other one that made big impact was the Des Moines Register, a newspaper in Iowa, created something called Harvest of Change. In VR, you can create anything you can imagine. They chose to make a farm. I don't know why they did that. Actually, I know why. I talked to them, the reason why. But they did, in Unity, recreated a virtual farm for you to explore and to experience through Oculus Rift. Since then, there have been a lot more experiences. Clouds Over Sidra from Chris Milk and Verse. They ended up partnering with the New York Times and released some stuff. Thomas Wellner did Polar C360. He's doing some amazing stuff. The Wall Street Journal converted the NASDAQ of 2004 into a roller coaster ride that you would experience. The Verge I think yesterday or the day before, released an interview with Michelle Obama, really nicely done with fantastic graphics. They did some really interesting hacks and cheats, and AP and Riot have partnered up. Again, every time I give this talk, I can add more and more logos to this thing. Here comes everybody. Are you among them? Are you experimenting? Right? And before they were on the scene, I was on the scene with my students. Right? This has become my brand, I guess, our googly eyes, experimenting with having my boss, Will Obey, try this stuff out, and I created a class. This is the end credit of my class, right? This is how we ended all our videos, a 360 swap of us, and we created a brand called, I think we pronounced it Javernalism, because it was cute and it made the VR fit in journalism. So that's our brand that we made. And we were featured on the YouTube 360 front page, and we generated over 150,000 page views. No, 150,000 views of our content and experiences, and it keeps growing. This was us messing around. We did lucha libre, Mexican wrestling. We did roller derby, these women on roller skates that are badass, and a cycling event called Ciclavia in Los Angeles. Right now, that was last semester. Also last semester, I was contacted by ProPublica. They told me about a story that they were working on and asked if I and my students could visualize that in VR, and that's what we were doing this semester. In fact, I was in Houston last week, came back to the airport, hugged my wife, kissed my kid, got on the plane to come here. And we're doing a piece for them in connection to the story they released about a week or two ago called Hell and High Water. It is about the Houston shipping channel and how a storm can wipe out that area